Hey, welcome everybody to our fireside chat. Thanks for joining us. I am Jeremy Castile. I lead product marketing here at GitKraken, and I am joined by Eric Amodio, our CTO and the creator of GitLens. Eric, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
GitCon crew.
Yes. Hey, so wanted to just start, could you tell us just a little bit about your background and sort of your role here at GitKraken?
Yeah, so I came on GitKraken about 3 years ago now with the acquisition of GitLens, the project I created probably 8 years ago now. It's just, dev tools have been a passion of mine for a long time, and just building tools for myself have been a passion for far, far longer. GitLens was born out of scratching my own itch, right? Like wanted to play with VS Code as it came out in its infancy. They shipped an extension API that we can actually play with, and I had teams that I was leading on, getting them onboarded to Git, and that was a challenge. So that's sort of where it was born out of. But it quickly started, from an experiment to, hey, what I do a lot as a senior dev is dive through history, come onto a code base, try to figure out why things are the way they are, and that was always a challenge, to dive through why things changed, or if I want to evolve this, making that better and learning, not repeating past mistakes. So that's why I wanted to create a tool that sort of brought up the knowledge that's locked in the code base to be accessible when you're writing new code. So that's where it came from, and continued grow to grow and snowball, and became far more successful than I would have ever expected from just something to work on nights and weekends and that sort of stuff. And then now taking it to a whole new level here today.
Yeah, so that's actually one of the things I wanted to ask you about GitLens, and I think people would be curious about. Is like, it's almost, I think, near 40 million installs. That's insane.
It is insane. Yeah, it is. It's definitely crazy. It's been a hell of a ride. The open source journey and sort of creating tools for free, it has both sides, pluses and minuses. Getting a lot of complaints from people on that sort of side is definitely challenging, but then there's a whole lot of positive constant reinforcement. But as a lot of open source maintainers know, it's definitely can take its toll, especially too, there's something that you created, you put out there. If there's a bug, if there's an issue, you just feel some level of responsibility to getting that resolved, and that becomes could become unhealthy. Now it's nice that I'm able to spend actual working hours working on it, and that sort of thing. So it's been a journey for sure.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, cool. So we want to chat about AI and developer experience. So wanted to ask you some questions around that. So from your perspective, tell us a little bit about like the key ways that AI is being leveraged. We talked about a lot about the developer workflow. How is AI being leveraged to kind of help improve the developer workflow from your perspective?
Yeah, it's something that's continuing evolving and changing, and it's changing quite quickly as not only AI has gotten more capable of what it can handle and just being able to do more things, but it's also just permeating more. We've got tons more people thinking about how it can affect different areas. When it started, a lot of it was just getting better autocomplete where I'm typing, help me finish that. And we've come a long way from that autocomplete, and the autocomplete itself has gotten much richer and better, and the tools in that space continue to evolve into some of them learning your style and your code base style and that sort of stuff. So like they become much more predictive. So in learning things across chain, like if I'm editing one thing in one file and I go into other files, so, keeping that context and meeting you where you are on that has been definitely interesting. But then taking that to sort of the next layer on being able to ask it to do more things, like, not just infer what I'm going to do, but I'm going to ask of, hey, finish this thing off, or like refactor this or change these sort of things, and it can make changes over that. So, GitHub shipped their Copilot edits very recently in VS Code and other places, and that's been a really interesting thing. Cursor's doing similar things in that. Augment is also doing interesting things around that angle. There's still an aspect of that right now you have to go, and I have to go to a chat and say that, do X, Y, and Z and drag in other contexts or that sort of thing. One of the things that I would love to see more of at some point, which is a much harder problem, is to, follow what I am doing and offer to not complete the line I'm on, but to complete the series of things. Like, I've started on this journey. Can you infer, can you help and suggest where to go next, and go next even further than just, literally the next step in my, where my cursor is, which we're already doing, but bring that across. So
almost like predict what you're trying to do in a way.
Refactoring a method, well, go and find all the places where that method is used and offer to change them because the signature changed, or I added this thing here, and that sort of stuff. That stuff is, I know people are working on some of those sort of things, but I'm interested there because it's going to help, sort of keeps you in that flow better than, I've got to completely exit my coding and go to a chat. So there's some interesting things there. And then the other side is, completely like the agentic flow. I still can't get used to that word.
Yeah, I know.
But using software agents and to do that sort of thing. So like that one, you're not starting in from the coding experience. You're starting from like an issue, a task, some level of context to get it to go and do that work. And there's some really interesting stuff coming along to like make that more accessible.
Yeah, I think it feels like it's definitely going in very productive places.
Yeah, I mean, it has challenges for the industry and where we go with that, because it's going to impact, actual people. But I think it's also just, it's extremely exciting at the same time for, a dev can basically expand their capabilities and capacity. Right, because like if I'm working on multiple different things, well, I can send this off, and if I can get the AI to add this simple part of the feature or this other feature, I can send kick these off in parallel. I can go to bed. Yeah, I can wake up and then come back and start running on that. Yeah. And then continue, and then we can continue to iterate on that. And right now it is still early days, and the output is not what you would really want, but it's getting better in a lot of cases too. Even if its output isn't the goal, it's a good starting point to get you along that path. So,
it takes a little hand holding, but you can get down that path. Yeah. Okay, let me ask you about some of the potential downsides since you mentioned it. I mean, are there risks of over-relying on AI? What are things that developers and teams should be aware of? Yeah,
I mean, there's lots of inherent risks in the fact that it's could be very inaccurate, right? It's AI models are still subject to their hallucinations and that sort of thing, but just they're trying to be helpful. Yeah, and they're not perfect predictors. Humans aren't either. So like there's plenty of times you ask a dev to go and do this sort of thing and you don't get the output that you expected because it wasn't spec'd well enough and that sort of thing. So, but there are definitely challenges. I think one of the bigger ones are just it's the trust of output. I think naturally humans are there's a little bit of deference of when things are, if your teammate says that, or if a super senior dev says it, right? Like then you're going to consider things differently. Maybe, yeah. And one thing that we have historically shown is that we will defer to a machine as having far more context, data, or something like it knows better than I do.
We just assume.
Yeah. And we assume these AIs are smart. They're not. They have a lot of context that they can draw from to help, but they're not intelligent at this stage. So deferring that and saying the output said that, it must be true, is one of the challenges. And that as a more seasoned dev or more experience in where you're asking it, because it's not even just your experience. It's just like what you're working in. Right? If you have experience in it, it's easy to sniff out or rectify those things where it's not the best option. But for more junior devs or devs that are working in something that they don't have prior experience in, it becomes fairly challenging, because it's, do I trust it? Like, can I trust it? Like,
well, I even saw that like with ChatGPT, and it's getting better at this, but like, in the work that I do, where I'll prompt, and then sometimes like if you ask it for like cite that, where did you get this? That was kind of the first indicator for me that was like, whoa, some of the hallucinations, or like you can't always trust the output here. Yeah,
and it like it's this double-edged sword too, is because you can't necessarily trust it. A lot of these models almost have over-indexed on the human response. So if you go and push back on it, it's like, oh yeah, I was completely wrong. And like in a lot of cases, it's not completely wrong, but it hallucinated some part of that, or like it offered you three options, and two of them were fine, but the third one was just not there. And like sometimes if you just like, hey, can you go and like re-vet that, you sort of get a little bit better. But like there's also where it's like, oh, you said no, so we're going to say, oh yeah, no, those don't exist. We made it up. And it's that's equally bad.
That definitely seems risky, especially, if you're like maybe modifying a, like critical piece of code, and you're relying on, the AI to maybe help you out with some of that, then it's like, there's layers of like, how much can I trust this thing? Can I trust what it's initially giving me? Can I trust the pushback that I'm giving to it, and now it's giving back to me?
Yeah, and then some things, some of the later models have gotten better of like, kind of a little bit if you push back on showing your work or that sort of thing. Because like, one thing that a lot of people, or that I've seen and would like to do is like, help optimize, or like, is this algorithm going to perform, or that sort of stuff, is like you're trying to write performant code and make sure that we're not creating issues there. They're typically pretty bad at some of that. They will offer things up that can actually make the performance significantly worse, or it's not considering. But like, sometimes if showing you work, it will actually start thinking through notation and when things are and that sort of stuff. But there's a lot that you can't really trust. When it would be more interesting is as these systems evolve, to be able to run and benchmark the actual code and changes, to say be able to run and vet that, and then feed that back into the model. Like it would be able to test that code, like run that unit test to see if the performance is worse or better, and that sort of thing. So like as these systems can get more connected to being able to run that code and be able to actually vet it that way, then you can hopefully get much more grounded responses. But they're still in the early days of getting that, but there's some interesting experiments going on to try to bring it to runnable stuff. Yeah.
It's super interesting, and I think there's plenty of risks. Based on sort of the conversation. Okay, cool. I want to ask you about, for developers who are kind of starting to, experiment with AI, what kind of like sort of advice, I guess, would you give them when they're starting down this path?
Yeah, I think that's a good point on the other side of risk is not taking advantage of it, because these tools, they have challenges. They're not like they're not the hammer that's going to open, you're going to undo a screw with a hammer. So like they're not used for everything, but it's also not taking advantage and leaning into, how these tools could be useful for you and your workflow to accelerate you, is, in my view, if you're not taking advantage of that, you will get left behind. These are tools that, if wielded, well, can really accelerate.
And that's true for outside of development as well. Yes. For so many different areas.
Yeah, and I think there's because of the hallucinations and those sort of things, it can be viewed as a fad or something that's overhyped. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's a lot of overhype I mean, there's plenty of overhype, but there is some real meat and value there. And it's like, to cut through that noise. It doesn't mean it's going to help you in every aspect or be right, but there's a lot of acceleration that you can take advantage of. And personally, I find it as a really invaluable tool. And it's an invaluable tool for learning, getting an answer, and helping accelerate. If I just want to iterate on an idea and want to just set off a wild prototype, if it gets me 20% down that road that I didn't do, and I wasn't gated by it, then it's really interesting.
Yeah, massive productivity booster. Yeah. So we chatted a little bit about this, but junior devs, senior devs, AI chatbots kind of in the middle, like where does that leave, junior devs, and are senior devs going to be relying more heavily on AI versus more junior developers?
Yeah. It's a hard one. I mean, it's a hard one to predict as, because things can change quickly, and, prior, these early models from, to 3 to GPT-4 and many of the things that have continued, right? Like we had these enormous, exponential growth on the capabilities and that sort of stuff. And that's slowed a little bit, but, maybe it resumes again. We'll see what the next gens, when that happens. But it's hard to see what that trend is going to be like, because if these agents can get to getting better quality output, then it does get challenging to I'll spin up an agent to go do that work versus send it to a junior dev to go do that. And then you create the challenge of how are you actually going to grow devs to get to senior to be able to do that? And I mean, I don't have good answers right now, other than if you are starting out, learning, leveraging the tools and being able to leverage and orchestrate the tools will put you ahead of a senior dev who's not going to take advantage of that. Yeah,
start using it.
It's try to take advantage of it, but it is challenging because without experience to lean on, it's hard to validate.
I mean, is there a scenario where it's it can help make the junior developer even that much more productive?
It definitely can. It's just the vetting and the quality is the challenge, right? Because if you can't say that output is good or bad, and you just trust it, well, there's challenges in there. But with enough testing set up, or guardrails that you have on the app and the things that you're doing, then hopefully you can sort of validate that. It may require more iterative loops that would lengthen things, but it still should be possible.
Okay, awesome. So one of the things I want to ask you about is analytics when it comes to activity. There's a ton of hype around this. There's a ton of different areas when it comes to productivity analytics, and we've talked about this a lot. I want to know your perspective on how does AI, what does it do for sort of whether it's productivity analytics or kind of software lifecycle analytics. Specifically, how does this help the developer?
Yeah,
or does it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the analytics side is the measurement of the output, but I think the AI is hopefully being able to tell us where the bottlenecks are, where we can deploy it more effectively, right? So I think the whole point of the analytics is to try to identify where there are gaps or challenges or bottlenecks in your life cycle, right? And so we know that there are significant bottlenecks in general in a lot of groups, from the starting work to actually getting the code in a good place, because it's whether requirements are filled out enough detail, if there's enough understanding and context to get started on something. And that's some area that we can start leveraging AI in more, is having it analyze the issues, having it analyze given a set of rules that your team likes to have of requirements, look at that, look at this issue. Is it actionable enough? Does it help with the brainstorming for who's ever building that out of, what other things should you consider if you're going to implement this feature? What are our security implications on that sort of thing? So you can start preloading that but it also could be just in time to like, dev went and grabbed this ticket, then they can work with the AI on flushing that out, making that more actionable, than helping to code that. And if you spend more time on the front end too, you may be much more successful on getting an agent to do a portion of that work as well. And then being able to so if you can shorten that cycle of because if you can spend that time without having to pull in and going back and loop through other people, you're going to shorten your time there. And then same with the the coding time. There's a lot of coding tools and helping to actually generate the code in that sort of thing. And then the review side is another area where we're trying to spend a lot of to figure out of how AI can really help with bringing in extra context to not only help you pre-review your code before you even necessarily submit it for the PR. Make sure that it does meet the requirements, that it meets our quality gates, our security stuff, do other scans, and then when you get to the PR, that your teammates can bring in that other context and give you a better outline. I mean, one thing too is just AI is really good at writing. And I don't just mean code-wise, but like so if it can summarize the set of changes, what you did, and some of your thought process from when you did the ideation at the front, if you can bring that in, summarize that down, consolidate it into, make it more concise, which AI is really good at as well, getting that PR so that someone else can get that context a lot easier to review the changes, and then, focusing on areas of code that they should review. And those, in theory, are really going to help those metrics. I think trying to analyze other than the throughput, it's really tricky at this stage to say how much AI helps certain metrics, right? Like, oh, did I write more lines of code faster? Well, maybe, but is that better output?
Yeah.
Is it
well, that's kind of what I'm wondering is like, we have tools to do that today, right? There are tools that do that. Does AI help improve that? Because sometimes you can game those metrics, or sometimes the metrics just like don't represent the reality. Does AI, will it help that at all? Yeah, I mean,
I think it will help to a degree, but it also helps game.
Yeah, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, hey, do this function, but like make it really verbose.
Yeah.
I've added 300 lines of code. I mean, AI in general, like in GitHub, actually shipped a blog post very recently about some metrics, and like the conciseness of code, it improved, in their random testing, that like conciseness was better than that sort of thing.
Interesting. So like code quality type of a thing?
Yeah, they did a whole code quality report. I think it just came out, very recently.
Okay.
And they were looking at many different axes on lines of code, but also like the how many lines were added to versus somebody doing the same task themselves, and that sort of stuff. So I mean in general, right, like the less lines of code, the easier to review, maintain, and that sort of stuff. So that's sort of a good thing, but it's still hard to tell based on like, well, is that code still readable? Like, did it become more concise? But that readability take a hit. They also, in that study, they said that readability went up as well, and from that side.
Okay.
So it wasn't just like it's cryptically concise. It was more concise but more consumable. I mean that's something that's interesting. Documentation is really good from that side too. But
one other thing on the analytics piece that I was curious about is like, is there an opportunity for like a better feedback loop for developers, like during a sprint, or before like the project maybe gets off track or is delayed or something like that? Will AI help with any of that type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one's tricky to watch behavior, but I mean, I think we want to be able to see where bottlenecks are, and then if you're if it's waiting in review, basically make sure that like we can sort of encourage the team to look at this sort of stuff, break that down, tying it into also where you might get stuck on pieces, trying to help through that, but I think it's like it helps those top lines by allowing you to be more effective at the stages through that cycle, but it's the loops through they're basically more about bringing context in the right place. Is to try to try to offer up and bring in extra context to when you're like starting the review, when you're doing the final stages of like, hey, I'm going to push this up, to bring that into that. So like, that sort of feedback loop through what your team thinks is important.
So, I mean, it sounds like, when you think about developer experience, a lot of it is, obviously, having all the right context, right? And it sounds like there's some opportunities there where AI can help. It's about like maybe reducing cognitive load where you're not having to go and find all these different things. You're not having to switch. You can maybe stay longer in like that flow state. But there's opportunities for it to still get better, across that. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big benefits, right, like the I guess the sort of ultimate goal is to help make sure the ultimate goal is just like get machines to write all the code, right? And you just tell it what you want to do. Oh, that's not the right thing. We'll do this one. And like you can just iterate.
So in that world, the software engineers become like product managers, or
probably. And I mean, I think we're still quite a distance from that, but that is like sort of the interesting end game is where like the code generation is free, or the code generation is actually dynamic, where it's like doing it in real time. Like your UIs don't get pre-coded. It's based on the state, based on what you're looking at. Like, oh, well, you're doing this thing. Well, we're going to render a UI that makes sense right then, and it's not pre-done. And there's some really interesting stuff like there's the pre-rendered Doom, where there's no engine. It's just the AI as you're moving the keyboard, just auto-generating scenes.
Okay, so like as you're moving through a world,
it's just
it generates as you go based on dynamically how you're interacting. That's cool.
And there's no graphics engine, no nothing. It's just generating the pixels as you're moving, and it's kind of insane.
Yeah.
But prior to that, actually lost my train.
I was just around like how AI is really helping to improve the developer experience, the context, the cognitive load.
Yeah, so the context piece I think is really important in the before the stage of the machines write it all, which is we've got time, but the is like one of the things in I'm old, so one of the things early was that you can build a lot by just keeping it all in your head, right? The systems weren't complex enough. I could literally keep the entire system in my head, so it was very easy to reason about and plan through. If I change this is going to affect this in the system and that sort of stuff. And we've, systems have gotten so complex that you can't reasonably keep that in your head. But AI can effectively keep it in its head. I mean, it's not there perfectly by any stretch now, but it's getting a lot better to be able to have that context. And so you to be able to tap into that to say, if I push on this, well, this thing's going to happen over here, to leverage that, to not have to keep that. So it basically can bring you to, that one dev who used to be able to keep that stuff in your head still effectively do that by leveraging this tool.
Is there a good system for that today where it kind of knows the context of sort of like, let's say you have a massive distributed system and it...
Yeah, I mean, for actually getting the more running context and like how your system pieces come together, I haven't seen any good for that yet, but getting the context of like your repository or even maybe a couple repositories to have that sort of broader context is definitely getting a lot better. And a lot of the models or not the models themselves, but a lot of the tools are diving deeper into indexing and taking context across the entire system and be able to say like, oh, if you change that here, what are the ripple effects, what this will change in the system, that sort of stuff. But it becomes a lot more interesting too, is to tie those into down the road of getting APM data of like, is this function run in production, how often does it hit, those sort of things, and sort of be able to tie that into the considerations that not only you as the dev need to have, but the AI would need to have when optimizing that or suggesting a change in there. Like if this function is going to get called 1 million times in production, you don't want that to be slow. And getting that more context to pull in, like that's not stuff that we can continue have in our head, but we can sort of bring in more and have accessible to the models themselves.
Yeah, I could see how that could be a massive boost. Okay, cool. So last question. I want, if you can predict the future for us a little bit, 5 years, 10 years, give us a glimpse into where is all this going?
I mean, it's really hard to say, right? Like, we went through GPT 3, 4, 5, 4, whatever, right? Getting to this hugely step function of just like the increased capability. And now we're sort of like seemingly hitting a bit of a ceiling. It's not really a ceiling, but we have to think differently than just doing the same thing that got us the previous stages. So it's hard to predict like where the time frames will get to. But, at some point, and at some point, is leveraging agents a lot more, like that's coming soon, like that exists in forms already today, but being able to do a lot more in those agents and have them be more effective is just going to continue to come. So there's aspects of it today, in my view,
agents
they're not
for
great.
Everything type of
just to do different work. I mean, right now a lot of the agent stuff in the app is really cool from like the creation side of smaller things, greenfield. They do seem really well, these incredible demos and that sort of stuff. To me, it starts falling apart when it gets into like your more complex app and dealing with larger.
But that's the
code
real
bases.
world.
And right, exactly. So that gets harder, but those will continue to improve. At some point, we're going to get to where the abstraction is going to have to move from today, before we used to write in assembly code and really low level down to the machine. And then you get higher levels of abstractions and we continue with higher level languages. Well, I think we will just get to yet another higher level language or, because it's coding, there will be many higher level languages because no one will agree on one. But, we'll get to something that will probably, in theory, be closer to, English or a natural language that will, we will not think, there will be the kind of almost new compiler. We won't think of what's below the surface. And, that will kind of move to, more of the sort of technical product person plus the product level of engineer of, really thinking through the problems. Those will be sort of guiding those sort of systems to generate that sort of thing. And, that's kind of, the transition I see over a longer horizon. It's hard to know if that's, does that start? I mean, in anything like when it starts and when it actually affects lots of people is always a huge distance because we're still writing COBOL in mainframes. That's still happening, and the AI has really interesting aspects there because it can fill gaps that we can't do today because no one wants to write that anymore. But when it starts, is it 3 years from now? Is it 5? It's hard to predict, but I think we are on that journey to we've been on that journey for continuously in development of like moving up the stack and having sort of more black boxes below, so you can build more on top. And this is just like another evolutionary layer to abstract the complexities below. I think it becomes even more interesting is like past that abstraction layer if you can get to systems that are much more real time where you're not actually even speccing out this, you're just saying what the shapes and data are, and then the users, the way they interact with it, auto renders what is needed based on what they're interacting with. And I think that's more way out there, but like it's really interesting, and it's like in narrow band it's not even that far out there, but this could be really exciting too. Yeah, because then it's like your interfaces, like what you're trying to get done, are truly meeting you exactly where you are, because it's you're trying to get this one thing, and it's perfectly tailored for what you're trying to do. Yeah, and how you behave, and it's unique to you rather than multiple.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like an exciting future, honestly. I think, you know, for devs who've been in it for a long time or are just getting into it, I think there's a lot of exciting stuff. There's definitely some risks and downsides, but
there are risks. There's a lot of, you know, questions the industry is going to need to grapple with, and like, you know, there will be tough transitions in that period, just like any big change. So, you know, these are things that shouldn't be taken lightly, but it's also super exciting.
Yeah. Hey, well, we're here for it. So, awesome. Thanks, Eric, for joining me for our fireside chat. Thanks, everybody. I hope you enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks.